My name is Katherine Larkin. I'm 62 years old, a retired accountant, and until recently, I thought I understood what family meant. I spent most of my life saving every dollar, building a home where laughter once echoed and birthdays left frosting on the kitchen counter. But that afternoon, my only son looked me in the eye and told me to leave, from the house I bought for him. If you've ever given everything to someone, only to be told you don't belong anymore, stay with me. This story isn't about anger. It's about what happens when silence becomes the loudest answer. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. "Mom, this is my house now. You should start packing." His wife, Lydia, leaned on the railing above, her manicured hand gliding along the wood like she owned the air between us. She smiled, the kind that hides satisfaction beneath politeness. I froze. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of my grocery bag slipping from my hand. The carton of eggs hit the floor, the shells breaking open one by one. The yolks spread like sunlight bleeding across the tiles. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him and said, "I see." Those two words carried the weight of 34 years of motherhood. Then I walked past him, the way you do when you realize the battle isn't outside the door. It's already inside your heart. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock above the fireplace. It had belonged to my late husband, Richard, the man who taught me to count not just money, but meaning. I used to believe our home was his legacy and that Evan would carry it forward. Standing there, I realized how wrong I'd been. In the kitchen, I picked up the cracked eggs, one by one, and dropped them gently into the trash. The smell of fresh coffee lingered from the morning, but it no longer felt like mine. Every object, the family photo, the silver spoon, the ceramic mug with "World's Best Mom," had turned into evidence of misplaced trust. From upstairs, I could hear Lydia's voice. "She'll come around," she said. "It's better this way. Once the paperwork's sorted, we can refinance." Paperwork. That word hit me harder than his sentence. I'd handled numbers my whole life, but nothing prepared me for the math of betrayal. I took a slow breath and sat down at the table, tracing the small scratch on the surface that Richard once called our lucky scar. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, but also sharper, clearer. Maybe that's what heartbreak does. It polishes you until only truth remains. Outside, rain began to fall. I watched it slide down the glass, merging into tiny rivers that carried bits of dust away. I thought about leaving quietly, the way women of my generation were taught to. Pack your things, stay graceful, don't make a scene. But something inside me whispered otherwise. Not revenge, not defiance, just balance. That night, while they slept upstairs, I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the door frames, the little notches on the pantry where I used to mark Evan's height as he grew. "My house," he'd said. The words echoed in my mind like thunder that refused to fade. In the master bedroom, the air still carried Richard's cologne, faint but steady. I opened the drawer where he kept his old letters and found one addressed to me. "For when things get too heavy." I didn't open it yet. Some things need to wait until you're ready to hear them. When I returned to the hallway, I caught my reflection again. Same woman, same wrinkles, but a different heartbeat. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing for sure. If this was his house now, it wouldn't be for long. So I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the clock. Midnight struck. The sound was calm, deliberate, almost comforting. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. I went to my room, closed the door, and whispered into the dark, "All right then." The rain outside grew heavier, but inside, my silence was louder. The next morning, the house felt colder, as if it had already decided I was no longer part of it. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, the steam fogging the glass in soft, uneven shapes. From upstairs came the faint creak of footsteps, and then voices, his and hers, muffled but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Evan's tone was low, tense. "The bank said it should go through by Friday," he said. "Once it's approved, we can finally breathe." Lydia's voice followed, smooth and practiced. "Good. Just make sure your mother doesn't interfere. She won't even notice until it's done." I didn't move. My fingers tightened around the cup, its warmth turning unbearable. The air in the kitchen thickened, carrying the metallic scent of betrayal. For years, I'd believed silence protected peace. That morning, I learned it also exposes truth. When their voices faded, I went to the study, Richard's old office, now buried under Evan's unopened mail. I opened the safe hidden behind the bookshelf, the same safe where Richard and I had locked away the title deed decades ago. The familiar click of the combination echoed like a heartbeat I hadn't heard in years. Inside, everything was neatly arranged: insurance documents, certificates, and one manila envelope labeled in my own handwriting: house title. I slid it out, the paper cool and dry against my palms. My name was still printed at the top: Katherine Larkin, sole owner. My lips parted, a soundless exhale escaping like wind slipping through a crack in the wall. I stood there for a long moment, staring at those letters, realizing that what they planned to take wasn't theirs to begin with. The kettle whistled from the kitchen. I turned it off before it screamed. Then I spread the papers across the table and began to read every line, every date, every seal. It was all intact. Not joint ownership, not inherited. Mine. Every nail, every floorboard, every corner of that house bore my effort, my late husband's hands, and years of quiet sacrifices no one had thanked me for. A strange calm settled in. Not relief, not victory, something steadier, colder. The kind that comes when numbers line up exactly the way they should. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared. Outside, Lydia's car engine started. Through the curtains, I saw her adjusting her sunglasses, the corners of her lips curving slightly as she spoke to someone on the phone. I didn't need to hear her words to know she was orchestrating something. Lydia always liked control, of people, of rooms, of stories. But I was the one who had built this story's foundation, and she didn't even know it. I folded the deed carefully and placed it in my leather purse. I'd spent my career tracking invoices and signatures. I could smell a forged document from a mile away. Something about her confidence, her insistence on paperwork, told me that what they were doing wasn't just selfish. It was calculated. I poured the remaining coffee down the sink and watched it swirl into the drain, dark and final. My reflection in the window above the faucet looked back at me, steadier than yesterday. "All right," I whispered to it. "You can do this." I changed into a clean blouse, one Richard had always said made me look too professional for retirement, and walked toward the door. My keys felt heavier than usual, like they carried more than metal and memory. As I stepped outside, the morning air hit me, cold, briny, laced with Oregon mist. The ocean wasn't far, but I could already hear its faint rhythm. For the first time since yesterday, I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I finally understood what I had to do. I didn't need to shout or argue or demand an apology. I only needed to act, quietly. The rain had followed me to town, tapping gently on the hood of my car as if to keep me company. I drove along the coastal road, the gray ocean stretching endlessly beside me, and pulled into a small cafe with a faded sign that read, Nora's Haven. The bell above the door jingled softly when I entered. The place smelled like cinnamon, old books, and second chances. Nora Mitchell looked up from behind the counter. Time had added silver to her hair, but her eyes were still as sharp as when we used to share late-night study sessions in college. "Kate Larkin," she said, smiling in disbelief. "It's been, 20 years?" "Almost 30, I said, managing a faint smile. "But I guess time doesn't matter when life circles back." She poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and motioned for me to sit. "You look like someone carrying more than groceries," she said gently. That was Nora. Never pushed. Always saw through. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth steady me. "Evan told me to leave," I said simply. Her eyes didn't widen. She just nodded slowly, as though she'd expected the storm to hit sooner or later. "He said it was his house. And Lydia, she stood there, watching. They're planning to refinance it behind my back." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the window and the hiss of the espresso machine. Then Nora leaned back, her expression soft but unwavering. "You bought that house, didn't you?" "With my own money," I replied. "Every mortgage payment, every repair, every tax bill. I kept the receipts, the title, everything." Nora took a sip of her coffee, then set it down slowly. "Then don't beg, don't plead, act." I looked up at her. The firmness in her tone surprised me. It wasn't anger, it was conviction. "You always knew what to say," I murmured. She smiled sadly. "Because I've been there. 10 years ago, my brother tried to sell our parents' cabin without telling me, claimed it was for the family. I let my silence scare him more than any lawyer could." Her words sank deep. It wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect. Nora reached under the counter and pulled out a business card, the edges slightly bent. "There's someone you should meet. His name's Marcus Bell. He's a property lawyer here in Lincoln County. Quiet man, smart, discreet. If your name's on that title, he'll make sure it stays that way." I took the card, reading the neat black letters. Marcus Bell, attorney at law. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Don't tell Evan or Lydia anything yet. Let them think you're small, unsure, tired. That's when people reveal themselves." I nodded. "You always had a talent for strategy." She chuckled softly. "Life teaches you patterns, Kate. Some people learn to listen, others learn to take. You've been listening too long." Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. I finished my coffee, the warmth finally reaching the edges of my fingers. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "Start with what's yours," she said, "and protect it like you would your peace." Before leaving, I looked around the cafe. The worn counter, the family photos on the wall, the faint hum of the old jukebox. Everything in this place was built by her hands, owned by her effort. There was a quiet power in that. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the smell of salt and pine. I slipped Marcus's card into my coat pocket and took a deep breath. The road ahead no longer felt lonely. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had something better. A direction. Marcus Bell's office sat above a hardware store on the quiet end of Main Street. It wasn't the kind of place that made you nervous. It smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, the sort of space built for listening more than talking. A framed law degree hung slightly crooked behind his desk, and a small brass lamp cast a warm pool of light over a stack of open files. He stood as I entered, a tall man in his 40s, with a calm, measured presence. "Mrs. Larkin," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Nora told me you might stop by. Please, have a seat." I sat across from him, clutching the envelope with the title deed. "I don't want drama," I said quietly. "I just want to make sure what's mine stays mine." He nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Then you've already made the smartest first move, coming in before reacting. May I?" He reached for the envelope, and I handed it over. His eyes scanned the documents carefully, each line, each seal. After a few moments, he looked up. "You're listed as the sole owner. The house was paid in full. There's no joint ownership, no liens, no encumbrances. In short, it's yours." Hearing those words should have felt like relief, but instead they stung. Then how can he just... I paused, searching for words. "Stand there and tell me to leave?" Marcus set the papers down gently. "People like your son's wife often rely on confusion. They use paperwork, fast talk, and guilt to wear you down. But confusion ends when facts enter the room." There was something reassuring in his tone. It wasn't pity. It was clarity. A knock sounded at the door. A man stepped in, rain clinging to his coat. "Sorry to interrupt, Marcus," he said. "You must be Mrs. Larkin." His voice carried that mix of politeness and fatigue unique to people who've seen too much business done badly. "I'm Alan Moore, real estate broker. Nora said you might need someone discreet." Alan's handshake was firm, his eyes steady. "I handle private transactions," he said, "especially the kind that don't need to hit the rumor mill." Marcus gestured for him to sit. "Alan's worked with me before, trustworthy and quiet. He also has a list of vetted cash buyers, people who value privacy." Alan opened a leather folder. "There's a couple from Vancouver interested in Oregon properties. Old money, clean background. They're looking for something coastal, turnkey. Your house fits that description perfectly." I blinked. "You mean sell it?" Marcus leaned forward. "Mrs. Larkin, selling isn't surrender. It's choosing peace before chaos chooses you. The title is in your name. You can sell it legally, securely, without informing your son. We can place the funds into a private escrow until you're ready. Everything by the book." The idea felt like a strange kind of freedom, not loud or impulsive, measured, deliberate. The accountant in me understood the safety of clean ledgers and locked accounts. Alan added, "The buyers can move fast. I'll handle the viewings quietly through a private access point. Nothing public, nothing traceable to your son until it's done." I studied their faces. Marcus, calm and methodical. Alan, direct but kind. They didn't see an old woman. They saw a client with power she'd forgotten she had. I nodded slowly. "Let's do it." Marcus smiled faintly. "I'll draft the initial documents tonight. You'll sign under your name alone. Alan will coordinate the buyer's escrow. Once the funds clear, we'll transfer ownership. Legally sound, airtight, and confidential." Alan closed his folder. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Larkin. Sometimes silence makes the loudest statement." As I left the office, the air outside felt different, lighter, though the rain hadn't stopped. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward my car, the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement like tiny stars scattered at my feet. I looked up at the cloudy sky and whispered, "Richard, I think you'd approve." That night, the house seemed quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath with me. I turned on the small lamp by the kitchen table and spread out folders, receipts, and binders that had followed me through decades of life. Every page smelled faintly of ink and dust, memories pressed flat between numbers and names. I began sorting. Old property tax forms on the left, insurance documents in the middle, closing statements on the right. For a woman who had spent her career as an accountant, this was muscle memory, order born from chaos. Each document reminded me of long nights balancing books while Richard slept in his chair, of paychecks stretched thin so Evan could go to college. all the small sacrifices that built the roof above us. As I worked, I labeled each file with a red marker, paid in full. The words looked firm, almost defiant, as if they'd waited years to speak for me. In the back of a drawer, I found a small notebook I hadn't opened in years. Inside were lists, every renovation, every purchase, every dollar accounted for. Proof that the home was not a gift, but an investment of a lifetime. My handwriting had changed over the years, softer, shakier, but the numbers were still perfect. At midnight, I opened my laptop and began scanning each document into a private folder. I named it Legacy, a word that once meant family, but now meant survival. The quiet hum of the scanner filled the room like a lullaby, steady and reassuring. Halfway through, I noticed something strange on a credit statement. Luxury purchases from an online boutique I'd never heard of. Designer handbags, cosmetics, and hotel charges in Portland. The account name read L. Larkin, Lydia. I scrolled further. Thousands of dollars charged to my card over the past 6 months. Spa visits, jewelry, even a weekend resort stay labeled business retreat. My hands tightened on the mouse, the veins in my wrist rising like blue ink. She hadn't just been disrespectful, she had been stealing, confidently, quietly, under my own roof. I printed the statements, each one louder than any argument I could have had. Then I placed them in a new folder and labeled it Evidence. The clock struck 1. Outside, rain fell in a slow rhythm against the windows. I turned off the kitchen light and walked into the living room, where the faint outline of family photos still glimmered in the dark. Evan's graduation, our first Christmas in the house, Richard holding baby Hannah. I touched the glass of one frame and whispered, "You'll understand one day." A knock startled me. It wasn't at the door, just a light tapping on the window. I turned and saw Nora standing outside in her raincoat, holding a thermos and a knowing look. I let her in, and the smell of hot cocoa followed her. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "I'm organizing things." She glanced at the stacks of papers. "That's not organizing, Kate. That's building a wall." I smiled faintly. Maybe that's what I need right now. Nora sat down, pouring the cocoa into 2 mugs. "Then build it quietly. Don't confront them. Don't show your cards. Let them believe you're still fragile." I nodded. "I found proof that Lydia's been using my credit cards. I'm keeping copies for Marcus." "Good," she said. "Let the law carry the anger for you. You just focus on peace." We sat there in silence for a while, 2 women in the soft hum of midnight, the sound of rain like a metronome for our thoughts. Before leaving, Nora put her hand over mine. "You know, Kate," she said gently, "you don't have to win loudly. Some victories sound like quiet breathing after a storm." When she was gone, I turned off the lights and looked out the window. The reflection staring back at me no longer looked uncertain. It looked ready. By Saturday morning, the sky had cleared, leaving behind that pale Oregon sunlight that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. I was in the garden trimming the hydrangeas when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Evan's name. For a moment, I just watched it ring, the sound slicing through the calm. Then I answered. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice overly casual, like he'd rehearsed it. "Lydia and I have a dinner tonight. Could you watch Hannah for a few hours?" In the past, I would have said yes before he finished the sentence. I loved that little girl, her curiosity, her laugh that reminded me of simpler years. But something inside me shifted that morning. The air smelled different, my chest felt steady, and my heart no longer leaped to serve. "No," I said softly. There was a pause. "What?" "I can't tonight," I replied, clipping another branch, the petals falling onto my gloves. "I'm busy. Busy? He sounded caught off guard. With what? Things that matter, I said, my voice calm but unshakable. He let out a short laugh, the kind that masked confusion. Mom, it's just a few hours. Lydia's been. I said no, Evan. I kept my tone even, the way you do when you've already decided. You'll figure it out. The silence that followed was heavy enough to hear his disbelief. I imagined him glancing at Lydia, searching for a reaction, realizing for the first time that my compliance was no longer guaranteed. When I hung up, my hands trembled slightly, not from guilt, but from a new kind of strength. Saying no had never been easy for me. Mothers of my generation were taught to say yes, to smooth the edges, to keep peace at any cost. But peace built on surrender isn't peace at all. It's a quiet kind of disappearance. A few minutes later, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Lydia's car pulled up, sleek and silver, reflecting the morning light. She stepped out, her designer coat swinging as she approached the porch with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Everything all right? She asked, voice sugary but tight. Evan said you were busy. I nodded. That's right. Her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. We just thought you might want to spend time with Hannah. She misses you. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw through her polished exterior, the calculation behind every word. I miss her too, I said, but tonight isn't the night. She blinked, her lips tightening. I hope nothing's wrong. Everything's fine, I said, turning back to my garden. Just finally taking care of myself. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of the wind moving through the trees filled the space between us. Then she adjusted her purse strap, gave a stiff smile, and walked back to her car. When she drove off, I exhaled deeply. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was freeing. I sat on the porch steps, the sunlight brushing across my face, and realized how small but powerful that word could be. No. It wasn't rebellion. It was balance. Later that afternoon, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the shadows crawl across the living room floor. The ticking clock filled the space like an old friend. I wrote a short note to myself on a scrap of paper. Your peace is not negotiable. I folded it neatly and slipped it into the drawer next to the deed. The same drawer where, one day soon, Lydia would go looking and find nothing she expected. Monday arrived dressed in fog, the kind that rolls in from the sea and stays until noon, wrapping the town in quiet uncertainty. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, and checked my email. There was one message from Marcus, flagged as urgent. Need to meet today. Important discovery. By 8, I was in his office. The small brass lamp glowed against the gray morning. Marcus looked up from his desk, his expression serious. Kate, he began, I found something you should see. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printed document, a power of attorney form, dated 2 months ago. My name, my signature, my address. Everything looked official, except it wasn't. That's not mine, I said quietly. I know, Marcus replied. It's a forged copy, likely created from an older file. Lydia must have scanned your records at some point. She changed the dates and notarization. I stared at the page, tracing the false signature. It mimicked my hand, but lacked weight. The faint slant of someone guessing at how I moved a pen. She used this, Marcus continued, to contact the mortgage company, tried to authorize a refinance without your consent. My chest tightened, not in fear, but disbelief. And Evan? He shook his head. He doesn't know yet. The application was flagged when the bank cross-checked her ID. That's how it landed on my desk. Someone at the bank remembered your name from a client file and sent me a copy for verification. I leaned back, the old chair creaking beneath me. The world had a strange clarity in that moment, like glass wiped clean after years of fog. She really thought she could get away with this, I murmured. Marcus folded his hands. She almost did. You're lucky the bank acted cautiously. I'll file an official statement to document the forgery, and I'll request a handwriting analysis. Once confirmed, it'll be evidence of fraud. Do it, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He nodded. We'll also place a protective notice on the property. No transaction can move forward without your notarized consent. I took a slow breath, staring at the fake signature again. You know, I said, for years I worried about losing this house. I never thought it would be my own family trying to take it. Marcus looked at me with quiet empathy. People change under pressure. Debt makes them desperate. But desperation doesn't excuse deception. I met his gaze. I want everything documented, every file, every timestamp. I don't want to destroy them, Marcus. I just want the truth written down. You'll have it, he promised. As I stood to leave, I noticed the fog outside thinning. The light began to spill through the blinds in faint golden strips. For the first time in days, I felt something close to calm, not because the danger had passed, but because I was no longer blind to it. Before I walked out, Marcus stopped me. One more thing, he said. If she forged this once, she might try again. Keep all your documents locked, and if anything feels off, call me before you respond. I nodded. I will. On the way home, I stopped by the ocean overlook. The tide was low, exposing long streaks of wet sand glistening under the muted light. I thought about my signature, that looping K, the little flick at the end that Richard used to tease me for. It's your stamp, he'd say. Never let anyone else use it. Now, his words meant more than ever. When I reached home, I opened the safe, checked every file again, and placed the real deed inside a new folder. Then I wrote across the front in thick black ink, "Do not touch." Upstairs, I could hear Evan moving around. Lydia's voice followed, bright and careless, as if nothing had happened. I sat down at the kitchen table, folded my hands, and whispered to myself, "You tried to steal my name, but you forgot who taught me how to write it." 2 days later, the world carried a strange calm, that deceptive kind of peace that settles right before the next move. The morning light filtered through the curtains, pale and deliberate. I sat at the table with a cup of tea, rereading Marcus's message. All verified. You're clear. Proceed when ready. I typed a short reply. Proceed confidentially. Then I pressed send. It was the quietest act of defiance I'd ever made. That afternoon, I met Alan at a discreet cafe near the docks. The scent of salt water drifted in each time the door opened. He was already seated, flipping through a folder with his usual precision. "The Canadian couple confirmed," he said. "They've transferred the earnest deposit to escrow. Marcus will manage the funds through his trust account just like we planned." I nodded. "And Evan?" "Still in the dark," Alan replied. "They have no idea the property is listed privately. The deal will be complete before they even sense a change in the wind." He passed me a small envelope. Inside were copies of the buyer's credentials and the draft purchase agreement. Everything felt measured, real, final. "You can review it tonight," he said. "Marcus already verified the legal boundaries. Clean transfer. No exposure." I tucked the envelope into my purse. "Thank you," I said softly. Alan gave a small smile. "You know, Lydia once tried to cut me out of a contract 2 years ago, cost me a commission and a client. It feels poetic to help you finish this one right." There was no bitterness in his tone, just quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from watching justice turn full circle. Later, I stopped by Nora's cafe. The smell of cinnamon and coffee wrapped around me like an old memory. She looked up from the counter, recognizing something new in my expression. "You've decided," she said. "I have," I replied. "The house will be sold to people who'll care for it." Nora poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I said, "as if I've been carrying a story that's finally ready to end." She nodded. "Then let it end on your terms." That night, I returned home earlier than usual. The sky was streaked with pink and gray, the kind of sunset that reminds you endings can be beautiful too. I prepared dinner, roasted vegetables, a small piece of salmon, and set an extra plate for myself out of habit, then smiled when I realized I no longer waited for anyone to join me. Evan and Lydia were out. I knew because the house was too clean, too staged, as if even the walls were pretending. I moved quietly through the rooms, touching the door frames one last time, like someone saying goodbye before the world knew it. After dinner, I logged into the secure account Marcus had created. I watched the transaction details update in real time. The buyer's funds moving into escrow, the title transfer pending review. Every number felt like a breath released, a heartbeat steadied. The ocean wind slipped through the cracked window, cool and briny. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn called, low and steady. I took it as a sign. Later, I met Marcus and Alan one final time to sign the preliminary documents. Marcus placed the last page in front of me. "Once you sign here, everything moves forward automatically," he said. The pen felt heavy between my fingers. My name flowed across the line, graceful, confident, alive. When it was done, I looked up at them both. "Keep it quiet until the final transfer," I said. "They'll find out soon enough." Alan nodded. "You have my word." Marcus gathered the papers. "You've handled this with remarkable restraint, Kate. Most people would have screamed. You just acted." I smiled faintly. Sometimes silence is the only language that power understands. When I drove home that evening, the first stars had begun to appear above the darkening sea. The headlights stretched across the winding road like threads of silver. For the first time since all this began, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was walking toward peace, slowly, surely, quietly. The following morning began like any other, until the sharp knock at the door broke the quiet rhythm of the house. 3 quick raps, confident and official. I set down my coffee, wiped my hands on a towel, and opened the door to find 2 uniformed officers standing beside Detective Ross. He was a tall man in his early 50s with kind but steady eyes, the kind that could see through excuses. "Mrs. Larkin," he said politely, showing his badge. "We received a call from your son regarding a matter of property dispute. He claims you might be withholding financial information or concealing assets connected to the mortgage." Behind him, Evan and Lydia stood by the driveway. Lydia's arms were crossed, her expression a mix of triumph and anticipation. Evan looked less certain, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I didn't raise my voice. "Please, come in," I said calmly. The officers stepped inside, scanning the living room as if expecting stacks of hidden cash. Detective Ross removed his hat, glanced around, and nodded toward the kitchen table where my documents were neatly arranged in labeled folders. "May we take a look?" "Of course," I replied. "Everything's here." He flipped through the papers, his movements careful, deliberate. Title deed, bank statements, notarized ownership documents, all pristine, all mine. "This is thorough," he said, almost impressed. Evan stepped forward. "She's lying," he said sharply. "That house was a gift. My father intended it for me. She's twisting everything." Ross turned toward him. Do you have documentation to support that, Mr. Larkin? Evan faltered. Well, not exactly, but, Ross's tone was measured, neutral. Lydia interjected quickly. We spoke to the bank. They confirmed there was refinancing in progress. Ross nodded slowly. Yes, and that's been verified as fraudulent, initiated under a forged power of attorney. The investigation confirms Mrs. Larkin's ownership. The property is legally hers. Lydia's lips parted, but no words came out. Evan's face drained of color. I watched quietly, my hands folded in front of me. There was no satisfaction, just the calm of truth landing exactly where it belonged. Ross gathered the papers and placed them back on the table with care. Everything checks out. Mrs. Larkin, you're within your rights to remain here or make any decision you see fit regarding this property. Thank you, Detective, I said softly. He turned to Evan and Lydia. I suggest you both tread carefully from now on. Filing false claims wastes public resources. His voice softened as he added, families fall apart fast enough without involving us. Evan's shoulders slumped. Lydia looked away, pretending to examine the window frame. As the officers exited, Ross lingered for a moment. You remind me of my mother, he said quietly. She never raised her voice either, but when she said something, people listened. I smiled faintly. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, he said, putting on his hat, and I think she would have liked you. When they left, the house fell back into stillness. I could see Evan and Lydia through the window, standing by the car in silence. Lydia gestured wildly, her words sharp and quick. Evan didn't respond. He just stared at the ground. I poured myself another cup of coffee. The steam rose slowly, curling into the morning light. Outside, the ocean wind shifted the curtains ever so slightly, carrying the scent of salt and justice. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was defending something. I was simply protecting what was already mine. That night, the house felt strangely hollow, like a stage after the final act. Evan and Lydia had gone silent since the visit from the police. I didn't know whether to call it peace or distance, but either way, the quiet suited me. The moonlight stretched across the living room floor, silver and thin. I poured a small glass of wine and let the stillness fill the space they used to occupy. I was halfway through washing the dishes when my phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. I dried my hands and pressed play. It was Evan's voice. The sound of him broke something open inside me before the words even came. Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Lydia said refinancing would solve everything. I owe $300,000, okay? I messed up. I just needed time. Please, don't make things worse. Don't sell the house. It's all I've got left. His voice cracked near the end. Then silence. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd done, just a confession wrapped in desperation. I sat at the table, phone still in my hand, listening to the echo of his words. 300,000. I remembered the day Richard and I paid off the last of our mortgage, how we celebrated with cheap champagne and laughed until we cried. To hear our son now drowning in debt he'd chosen, not inherited, felt like watching him tear apart everything we'd built. My eyes drifted toward the old wooden jewelry box on the shelf. I hadn't opened it in years. When I did, the familiar scent of cedar and thyme greeted me. Inside lay Richard's wedding band and mine, still polished, still faithful. I lifted mine gently, the cool metal pressing against my palm. Richard, I whispered, it still hurts. The truth was, I missed the way he saw the world, measured, patient, never rushed to anger. He would have known how to talk to Evan, how to reach him without breaking him. But I wasn't him. I was the one left to live with the pieces. Tears stung, then steadied. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills your chest with both sorrow and resolve. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit tighter than I remembered, like the past was reminding me it still belonged somewhere inside me. I stood and walked through the rooms, the ones I'd cleaned, paid for, loved into being. Every chair, every photo, every quiet corner carried the weight of choices made in good faith. And now, all of it was tangled in the greed of people I'd once called family. By the window, I looked out toward the sea. The waves shimmered under the moonlight, restless but constant. Somewhere between the crash and retreat of water, I found the rhythm of my own strength again. I turned off the phone, set it aside, and whispered into the dark, "I won't let your mistakes define me, Evan. Not anymore." Then I took the ring off and placed it beside his father's. Two circles of gold resting together, not symbols of loss anymore, but of endurance. When I closed the jewelry box, the latch clicked softly, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. I didn't need to cry. The ache had turned into something else, quiet purpose. Tomorrow would bring more confrontation, more fallout, maybe even regret. But tonight, there was only stillness and truth. I poured the remaining wine into the sink, rinsed the glass, and turned off the light. As I walked down the hall toward my room, I could almost hear Richard's voice again, low and calm, saying what he always did whenever life tested us. Balance the books. Kate, always make sure they balance. And this time, they finally would. The next morning began with the sound of engines. Not the soft hum of a car pulling into the driveway, but the grinding roar of a moving truck. I opened the curtains and froze. A rental truck was backed up near the porch. Its ramp extended like a metal tongue, ready to swallow everything in sight. Lydia stood by the driver, pointing toward the house, her voice sharp even through the closed window. Evan was carrying boxes, shoulders hunched, moving fast, avoiding my gaze. It was happening. Again, without a word to me. I slipped on my coat, steadied my breath, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the sky a deep gray that smelled of salt and warning. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice calm but steady. Lydia didn't even flinch. "We're moving some of our things to storage," she said. "Just until everything's settled." I glanced at the furniture already stacked inside the truck. My furniture. The oak dining chairs Richard had built with his hands, the framed family photo, even the antique lamp from my mother's estate. "Those aren't yours," I said quietly. Evan finally looked at me. His eyes were tired, red. "Mom, please, we'll bring them back. It's temporary." I shook my head. "No, Evan. You don't move what you didn't earn." He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, a familiar voice called from across the street. "Kate, you might want to see this." It was Graham, my neighbor, the retired Marine with a camera always hanging around his neck. He jogged toward us, holding up his phone. "I saw the truck when it pulled in," he said. "Figured you'd want some proof before they drove off." He angled the screen toward me. On it was a clear video of Lydia directing the movers, her voice distinct and commanding. "Take everything from the downstairs. She won't even notice half of it's gone." Lydia's face went pale. "You can't record me without permission." Graham's tone was calm but firm. "On my property, I can record anything in plain view. And I just sent a copy to Marcus Bell." I turned back to her. "I think we're done here." Evan looked trapped between us, eyes darting from Lydia to me. "Mom, please don't what?" I interrupted softly. "Don't stop you from stealing what I built. Don't stand up for myself." He said nothing. Lydia crossed her arms, her face hardening. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "No," I said. "I'm correcting one. I pulled out my phone and made a single call. "Marcus," I said when he answered. "It's happening. They're moving items out of the property right now." "Understood," he replied. "Don't interfere. Just stay calm. I'll handle it." Minutes later, he called back. "Alan's on his way with the paperwork. Everything's legally documented. Don't let them take another thing." I hung up and faced the movers. "Gentlemen," I said evenly, "if you remove one more box from this house, you'll be part of a theft report. The property title belongs to me alone, and I can show you the documentation." The driver hesitated, looked at Lydia, then at me. "Ma'am, I think we're done here." He motioned for his crew to start unloading. Lydia's composure cracked. "You're all cowards," she snapped, her voice shaking. "This isn't over." I took a step closer, my voice low but certain. "It is. You just don't know it yet." The sound of boxes thudding back onto the ground filled the silence. Evan stood motionless, his eyes heavy with something that looked a lot like shame. When the truck pulled away, the driveway was littered with damp cardboard and broken pride. Graham walked over, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Got everything on video," he said. "And don't worry, I already sent copies to your lawyer's email." I exhaled, a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Thank you, Graham." He smiled. "You remind me of my old commander, quiet until it really mattered. Then no one could move an inch without her permission." I laughed softly. I suppose we learn that with time. When he walked back home, I turned toward the porch. The house stood still behind me, battered but intact, like it was holding its ground just as firmly as I was. I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Richard, I hope you're watching." Then I gathered the scattered papers from the driveway, folded them neatly, and carried them inside. Tomorrow, the truth would arrive, on paper, with signatures and seals. But today, silence had spoken loudly enough. By Thursday morning, the papers were ready. Marcus called early, his tone composed but edged with quiet triumph. "Kate, the sale clears tomorrow, but there's one more thing you should know. Lydia's lawyer filed a temporary restraining order against you last night. They're claiming elder abuse and financial manipulation." I let out a soft breath, half a sigh, half a laugh. "Elder abuse? From the woman who forged my signature?" "Exactly," Marcus said. "They're trying to delay the closing. It's a scare tactic." "Then we end it," I replied. 2 hours later, I arrived at his office. He already had the TRO packet open on his desk, the legal jargon spread like a bad play with predictable dialogue. "They filed it with fabricated emails," Marcus explained. "But I requested an emergency review. The judge agreed to a phone hearing." He dialed the number, put it on speaker, and within minutes, a calm female voice answered from the courthouse. "This is Judge Harrison. We're reviewing case number 2457B, temporary restraining order filed by Lydia Larkin against respondent Katherine Larkin." Marcus spoke clearly. "Your Honor, we have evidence this order is based on falsified documentation. My client's signature was previously forged in an attempted property fraud, now under investigation." "Do you have proof?" the judge asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "We're submitting the verified handwriting report and notarized deed. We also have a recording of the petitioner's involvement in an attempted theft from the property." There was a pause on the line, then the crisp sound of paper turning. "Noted," the judge said. "TRO vacated. This case is dismissed." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash through me. Not joy, just calm. The kind that comes when the truth is finally louder than the noise around it. Marcus hung up and smiled. "It's done. She can't stall anything now. The sale proceeds tomorrow." But he wasn't finished. There's one more layer we're adding, a voluntary adult protective services review. It'll officially close any question about abuse or coercion. The APS investigator will confirm your independence and financial control. That afternoon, the process unfolded like a quiet montage of justice. An APS officer visited my home, clipboard in hand. "Just a few questions, Mrs. Larkin," she said kindly. "Do you manage your own accounts?" "Yes," I replied, showing her the neatly organized ledgers and receipts. "Do you feel safe?" "I feel free," I answered. She smiled, scribbled a note, and asked to see the sale documents. Marcus had already sent her digital copies. Everything notarized, transparent, irrefutable. She read them slowly, nodding as the pages turned. In the background, the clock ticked softly, steady and sure. Graham waved from across the street as he watered his garden, a small reassurance that the world was still turning the way it should. The APS officer closed her folder. "Everything's in order, Mrs. Larkin. You're very organized." "Occupational habit," I said with a small smile. "Once an accountant, always an accountant." She laughed gently, shook my hand, and left. The door closed with a soft click that felt like a seal on a long chapter finally ending. I called Marcus afterward. "She's done reviewing," I said. "Good," he replied. "She'll file her report today. By the time Lydia learns the TRO's been dismissed, the APS case will already confirm your record is clean. No loopholes left." I sat by the window, watching the ocean mist drift in over the hill. Somewhere out there, a storm was passing, but not over me anymore. That night, I wrote a single sentence in my notebook. "Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs time to stand still." Then I placed my pen down, folded my hands, and looked at the house one more time. Every corner, every shadow, every memory was about to belong to someone else. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel loss. I felt release. The day of the handover arrived dressed in soft autumn light. The sky above Lincoln County was the color of faded denim, calm and clear, as if even the weather understood something important was ending. I woke early, made coffee, and let the smell fill the kitchen one last time. Every sound felt magnified: the drip of the pot, the low hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old floorboards that had memorized my steps for decades. Alan's car pulled into the driveway at 9. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing that quiet smile of someone who knows the job is nearly done. "Morning, Mrs. Larkin," he said. "The buyers are on their way. Marcus is already at the title office finalizing the transfer." I nodded. It's a good day for an ending. We walked through the house together one last time. The rooms echoed faintly without furniture, the air carrying a strange mix of nostalgia and clarity. Alan paused by the living room window. "You kept it beautiful," he said softly. "Because it was built with love," I replied, "even when love forgot to stay." When the doorbell rang, I felt my chest tighten for the briefest second. Mr. and Mrs. Rivers stood outside, mid-40s, well-dressed but unpretentious, the kind of people who still looked at homes with wonder instead of calculation. "Mrs. Larkin," the woman said warmly, "thank you for meeting us. It's truly an honor to buy your home." I smiled. "Take good care of it," I said. "It's held more stories than most people could imagine." They stepped inside, looking around with quiet admiration. Their fingers brushed the stair rail, their voices soft with appreciation. Watching them, I realized how right this moment felt. The house didn't need to stay in the past. It needed to breathe again. Then I heard the sound I had been expecting. Tires on gravel, heavy footsteps on the porch. Evan and Lydia. Lydia walked in first, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk searching for leverage. Evan followed, slower, uncertain. "What's going on?" he asked. "Why are strangers in our house?" I met his eyes steadily. "It's not your house, Evan. It never was." He looked at Alan, then at the couple, then back at me. "You sold it?" His voice cracked. "You actually sold the house?" Alan cleared his throat. "The sale is final as of this morning. All funds are transferred into a protected escrow account under Mrs. Larkin's name." Lydia's face drained of color. "You can't do that," she hissed. "You didn't tell us." "I didn't have to," I said calmly. "My name was on the title. I simply chose to finish what your lies began." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint tick of the wall clock marking the seconds of a life moving forward. Evan's shoulders slumped. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You didn't even warn me." I looked at him softly. "I tried to, Evan. Every day you turned away. Sometimes silence isn't consent. It's the last chance to listen." He swallowed hard, glancing at the couple who now stood quietly by the door. "So that's it? You just walk away?" I shook my head. "No, I walk forward." Mrs. Rivers stepped forward, extending a gentle smile. "We'll take good care of it," she said. "You have my word." "Thank you," I replied. "That's all I wanted." Lydia tried to speak again, but her words came out brittle. "You'll regret this." "I already did," I said softly. "That's why I stopped." Alan handed me the final set of papers and a single silver key, the last one left. I placed it in Mrs. Rivers's hand. "Every house needs a heart," I said quietly. "This one has already learned how to survive." Evan stood frozen by the doorway, watching the moment unfold. For a second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who used to hide behind my legs when thunderstorms rolled in. His eyes softened, and I caught a flicker of something almost human again. Regret, maybe, or the beginning of it. Alan closed his folder. "That's everything, Mrs. Larkin. The transfer is complete." I nodded, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. "By the time they realize it," I said gently, "it's already done." When I stepped outside, the autumn breeze brushed against my face, cool and forgiving. The sound of the ocean carried faintly in the distance, a reminder that life doesn't stop when you let go. It flows differently. Behind me, the door closed with a quiet click, sealing not just a house, but a chapter. It didn't take long for the next storm to find me. 2 days after the handover, I received a call from Detective Ross. His voice was steady, professional, but softer this time. "Mrs. Larkin," he said, "I'd like you to come down to the station. Your son filed a report claiming you stole funds and sold his property without permission. I know how this sounds, but I have to ask a few questions for the record." I sat in silence for a moment, looking out at the sea from my apartment window. The waves rolled in slow, rhythmic breaths against the rocks below. "Of course," I said finally. "I'll bring documentation." When I arrived, the station smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Ross greeted me at the door himself, leading me into a small interview room with gray walls and a single table. His demeanor wasn't accusatory, more like someone fulfilling a duty he already knew the answer to. He opened a folder. "They're claiming you manipulated financial assets and transferred ownership fraudulently," he said. "It's a serious accusation, though the report looks thin." I placed a large envelope on the table and slid it toward him. "Everything's in here," I said. "Bank transfers, escrow confirmations, notarized documents, APS clearance, and Marcus's legal statement." Ross raised an eyebrow. "You came prepared." "I used to be an accountant," I said gently. "Numbers tell the truth faster than people do." He smiled faintly and began reviewing the papers. One by one, he checked the dates, signatures, stamps, and seals. After several minutes, He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. Everything matches. This is clean, Mrs. Larkin. Very clean. He tapped the final document lightly with his finger. The sale was lawful, the escrow trails transparent, and you even have the APS verification. There's not a single loose end. I nodded. I learned a long time ago to close every ledger before moving on. He stood, closing the folder. Then I can tell you with confidence, this case will be dismissed before it even begins. I'll make sure of it. As I rose to leave, he paused at the door. You know, he said quietly, I deal with a lot of families tearing each other apart over things like this. But you handled it with grace. You didn't fight back the way most people do. I looked at him, my voice low but steady. Because screaming doesn't make you right. It just makes you tired. The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs patience. He studied me for a moment, then smiled. You remind me of my mother. She was the same way. Quiet, stubborn, always 2 steps ahead. She used to say the world has a strange way of correcting itself if you let it. She was right, I said. Justice doesn't always come with noise. When I stepped out of the station, the late afternoon sun was beginning to break through the clouds. The light hit the pavement in golden streaks, soft and forgiving. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air, feeling something lift. Maybe vindication, maybe closure. Across the street, a group of school children laughed as they ran past, their backpacks bouncing. One of them, a little girl with dark curls, turned and waved at me for no reason at all. I waved back. It felt like a small blessing, the universe's quiet nod that everything was settling where it belonged. Back home, I placed the documents in a drawer labeled Final. For the first time in months, I didn't check my phone. I didn't look for messages from Evan. I didn't replay what could have been done differently. I just sat by the window, watching the horizon blur between sea and sky, and let the quiet fill the room. Some victories don't look like triumphs. They look like peace. And peace, I realized, was the one thing no one could ever take from me again. The apartment was smaller than the house I had left behind, but it breathed differently. Open windows, the sound of waves, sunlight spilling across the floor like forgiveness itself. From my balcony, I could see the shoreline curve in both directions, endless and quiet. It was my first morning waking up without the weight of a house, a fight, or a name to defend. Just me. I brewed coffee slowly, the way Richard used to on weekends, and let its warmth settle into my hands. The ticking clock on the wall matched, the rhythm of the tide outside. Everything felt still, deliberate. I had survived the storm, and somehow I'd washed up in a softer world. A small knock came at the door. When I opened it, Hannah stood there holding a drawing. She looked smaller than I remembered, her backpack slipping off one shoulder. Dad brought me, she said shyly. Evan waited a few steps behind her, his expression uncertain. I crouched down to her level. What's this, sweetheart? She handed me the paper, a house drawn in crayons with a garden, a smiling sun, and a small figure by the sea. It's you, she said. Mom said you live by the ocean now. I smiled, my throat tightening. It's beautiful. Thank you. Evan cleared his throat softly. Mom, I came to apologize. His voice wavered like the edge of a broken wave. I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. Lydia's gone. She took what was left of the money and left a note. I deserve all of this. I studied him, the man who had once been my little boy with scraped knees and 2 big dreams. There were lines on his face now, shadows that hadn't been there before. Evan, I said gently, pain teaches us what comfort never could. He nodded, eyes glistening. I thought if I had the house, I could fix everything. I was wrong. I reached out, touched his arm lightly. I didn't want revenge. I just needed peace. And now I have it. Hannah tugged at my sleeve. Grandma, are you moving again? I smiled down at her. No, sweetheart. I'm moving toward peace. Evan looked down, tears threatening. I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. I turned to the small writing desk near the window, picked up a sealed envelope, and placed it in his hands. My handwriting was neat and careful. For Evan. It's not forgiveness, I said softly. It's understanding. Open it when you're ready. He hesitated, then tucked it into his coat. Thank you. He took Hannah's hand. We'll visit again, if that's all right. Always, I said. The door's open, but the key stays with me. After they left, I sat on the couch for a long while, the silence filling every corner. Then my eyes fell on another envelope resting on the table, one that hadn't been opened. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted, and uncertain. I'm sorry, it read on the front. Evan must have slipped it through the door last night. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of unspoken words. Then, instead of opening it, I picked up my pen and wrote 2 simple words across the front. It's all right. I left it there, exactly as it was. Some apologies don't need to be heard to be accepted. Later that evening, I walked down to the beach. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the air scented with salt and pine. I carried a small silver keychain, the one engraved "Home, Sweet Home." It had hung by the front door for 20 years, and now, for the first time, it had no door left to open. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose. I stepped into the edge of the tide, the cold water curling around my ankles. I held the key in my hand, its metal catching the last light of day. A key only matters, I whispered, when it opens the right door. Then I let it fall. The water swallowed it easily, pulling it beneath the surface until it was gone. I stood there until the waves blurred into twilight, until the world turned blue and soft and endless. Somewhere behind me, the city lights began to flicker, but I didn't turn back. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't leaving anything. I was finally free.